my dears, and welcome to another video. I'm so glad to have you. For friends who need it right off the bat, I'm a young white person with light brown chest length curly hair. I'm wearing a pink button up and I'm sitting in front of a plain wall that has green leaves on it. I will be staying stationary for the entirety of the video. Now today, to honor Valentine's Day, we're going to unpack the history, legacy, and accuracy of love languages and attachment styles because I've always had questions about it and never really gone into it, and now we're gonna do it and it's gonna be great. I hope that you're excited about it. Now you've probably heard people say like, oh, my love language is words of affirmation, or quality time is my love language, or you've seen a meme about how like the emotional support chair that's covered in laundry is your love language, something like that. I know that I've seen those things everywhere. I've also had people ask me, you know, Sydney, what is your love language? And then I completely blue screen because what if I like all of them? But also it depends on the context, and oh no, what if I'm broken? Now the idea of the 5 love languages was created by a dude named Gary Chapman, a Baptist pastor in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, who as a marriage counselor in the 80s and 90s, please note this man is not a psychologist, his doctorate is in religious education. That's what he does. He felt that he saw a common undercurrent causing issues in most of the marriages that he was counseling, and he basically concluded that partners fight because they're trying to express love in a way that the other person does not understand, and that if they simply learn to speak each other's love language, their marriage would magically be fixed. And those love languages are acts of service, words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, and quality time. In 1992, Chapman published a book titled The 5 Love Languages: Secrets to Love That Lasts, that did fine initially-ish, but then experienced astronomical growth in popularity around the turn of the century, selling more than 20 million copies in 50 languages and spent many weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. He then published special editions that are the love languages of children, of teenagers, of God, for men, there's no for women for the record, military edition, singles edition, and a teens guide. Because the of teenagers is for parents of teenagers, the teens guide is for teens. There's also an app, there's a website, and there's a bunch of podcasts. Chapman also published an updated version of the original text in 2015 that takes up some of the things that had been significantly critiqued by readers about the original. Primarily the like, here's a scenario that condones marital abuse and violation of consent aspects of the original text, which arguably was never actually fixed or taken out. It was just made a little less severe. But in this book, Chapman claims that a relationship will be happier and more successful if both partners speak the same love language. But if those love languages are different, you need to learn how to speak their language and how to pay attention to their needs. Chapman then devotes 5 chapters to identifying each of the love languages in a partner, just 1 to identifying your own love language, and the better part of 6 chapters, essentially the rest of the book, to specific strategies for adapting your behavior to your partner's love language. In other words, what often gets lost in the discourse is that the 5 love languages encourages attentiveness and behavioral self-regulation above all else. On the surface, the idea of like, hey, maybe you should see how your partner likes to be loved and then communicate what you need and how you like to be loved is a really great idea. Proper communication is always going to make things better for you. And if this helps to give the language to help open those conversations to be able to have deeper ones beyond this, that is awesome. I'm not going to take that away from you. Go for it. But beneath the surface level 2-sentence summary of the concept, things get pretty wonky pretty quickly. The main thing is that the idea of the 5 love languages is based on 3 assumptions: that each person has a primary love language, that there are exactly 5 love languages, and that most issues in relationships stem from people speaking different ones. Chapman sort of implies that this is a one-size-fits-all band-aid that can fix every single relationship situation. There have been many different studies trying to figure out if any of those 3 assumptions have any validity to them, and there isn't really any support for that. First, there are probably more than 5 love languages, things that respect the personal growth of a partner, that respect a partner's autonomy and what goals they may have outside of a relationship are not included in the original 5. There's also no support that if partners share the same primary love language, they will have a healthier or a happier or a longer relationship. The love language quiz itself isn't a very effective measure to begin with because it requires the quiz taker to pick between things that aren't actual trade-offs that people tend to make in real life or things that aren't comparable. Like, it's more meaningful to me when I receive a loving note, text, email for no special reason from my loved one versus when my partner and I hug, which are 2 different things that aren't really comparable. Or it's more meaningful to me when I spend alone time with my partner, just the 2 of us, versus my partner does something practical to help me out. Those 2 things can happen at the same time. One does not mean you cannot have the other, and again, they're very contextual. Like, for example, it would be more meaningful to hug a partner after a good cry than it would to have my sister send me a meme in that moment, right? But in another moment, having somebody email me out of the blue to say how proud they are of me on a bad day would mean more to me than just being comforted by a hug. One particular study from last year that sort of collated all this information together is by Impet et al., and I'm going to quote Vox's breakdown of some of the results about this quiz rather than the paper, just for simplicity of language and message, but this is from the paper. When people are asked to rate the importance of each love language on a scale of 1 to 5, they tend to give all 4s and 5s. If you try to force their hand by designing a test that makes them choose one, the same person will end up with a different answer depending on how you administer the test. It's almost like healthy relationships actually require most, if not all, of the love languages to be healthy. Wild how that happens. But in acknowledging that the data don't check out for the love language theory, it's also important to acknowledge what research was done to create this theory in the first place. Chapman, a non-psychologist pastor, worked exclusively with white heterosexual conservative Christian couples, many of whom functioned with the wife staying home with the kids and the husband working to provide for the family, which is not at all indicative of the diversity of the general population. And also Chapman's own biases toward that kind of outlook on life heavily impact how he crafted and now applies this love language theory. There is a constant bend towards if it's not working, you're not trying hard enough to fix the problem throughout, as well as just a rampant undercurrent of blatant sexism and misogyny. One particular story functionally says that if the husband is abusive to the wife, she needs to coddle him more until he figures out how to fix that himself. Another one says that the wife needs to have sex with her husband more to respect his love language of physical touch, even if that makes her feel uncomfortable, while he needs to help her by offering to vacuum more because her love language is acts of service, which are not things that equate in value at all whatsoever, and we should not encourage people to have sex they do not want to have for obvious reasons. And many of his case studies lean precisely toward the vibe of that second example, and it's very gross. He also had something on his website about how to love your child even if they've told you that they're gay, which is not fantastic. That has since been taken down, but there are screenshots online if you're interested. I don't think including precise quotes of any of these things is going to be particularly helpful in the balance of use upsetting quote versus give vague summary that I like to walk in these videos. There are also some other issues with the practicum of love languages, like how they get used out in the wild, but we're going to put a pin in that for a moment and head over to attachment styles first. These are a bit more involved and a little bit less straightforward than love languages because they actually come from a scientific place, complicated scientific place. We'll get there. Let's start by talking about what the attachment styles are. Basically, the idea of attachment theory is that there are specific ways that each human, and also some animals, kind of depends on the species, relate to and bond with other people in relationships based on how their bond was with their initial caregiver, usually their mother, as a child. The 4 attachment styles are secure, avoidant, sometimes called dismissive, anxious, sometimes called ambivalent or preoccupied, and disorganized, sometimes called fearful avoidant. Now, according to my college psychology textbook, 60% of the US population is secure, 20% is avoidant, 15% is anxious, and 5% is disorganized. I don't know from what precise study that's from, or how accurate that is, or how big their sample was, or how they tested that, or how those numbers have changed, but I've seen different numbers in every single website that I've looked at about this topic, so I gave up. Secure people feel comfortable with intimacy and are usually warm and loving. Anxious people crave intimacy and are often preoccupied with their relationships and tend to worry about their partner's ability to love them back. Avoidant people equate intimacy with a loss of independence and constantly try to minimize closeness. Attachment styles originated in 1958 with British psychologist John Bowlby, who was interested in Konrad Lorenz's discovery of how geese imprint on their mothers, as well as Harry Harlow's work with monkeys and maternal separation, and he concluded that human babies, much like geese and monkeys, have an innate ability to attach to caregivers and that the behavior of that caregiver is crucial to the development of that child. The behavior of mothers as the primary caregiver was central to Bowlby's hypothesis. If a mother was what he called affectionless and not able to fulfill the feminine maternal ideals of being present and emotionally supportive, her child would be damaged and experience long-term cognitive, social, and emotional difficulties. Bowlby's student, Mary Ainsworth, created what is called the strange situation test, which they used to identify the types of attachment styles. In this test, a caregiver would put a 1-year-old in a room full of toys and then leave the room. While they were gone, a stranger would enter, then the stranger would leave, and then the caregiver would return. The baby's reactions would then determine their attachment style. If they cried when the caregiver left and were easily soothed when the caregiver returned, they had a secure attachment style. If they cried when the caregiver left and were unable to or struggled to be soothed, they had an anxious attachment style, and if they had no reaction when the caregiver left, they had an avoidant attachment style, though it was noted that often the heart rate and blood pressure monitors would demonstrate a high degree of stress despite the child not seeming to visibly react. Later research into adults found that children's attachment styles tended to be the same as their parents and to stay the same throughout their lives, implying that they are a stable concept and that to some degree innate biology is also likely involved. In 1987, social psychologists Cindy Hazan and Phil Shaver decided to apply attachment theory to romantic relationships and publish it. After that study came out, attachment styles were suddenly being used to describe absolutely everything about human behavior. Attachment Attachment styles had a recent resurgence after a book titled Attached: The New Science of Adult Attachment and How It Can Help You Find and Keep Love was published in 2010, and much like Chapman's book, did fine for a while, but then skyrocketed in 2021. It has been translated into 20 languages and also spent many weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. This is around the time that TikTokers picked this idea up as a great way to describe, in short form, every single relation problem that you've ever had and how to fix it. But as early as 1962, this theory was being criticized for being so single factor around a mother's behavior. Some studies were coming out that suggested that attachment styles in romantic relationships often do not mirror the one a person has with their parents at all, as well as the fact that a child's temperament has as much to do with how they handle the strange situation test as their attachment style would. People also noted that much of Bowlby's research was done on boys in a juvenile prison, attributing their issues to their mothers and not acknowledging the other factors that may have led them to have issues in life. Most notably, class, which is a stronger predictor of outcome in most aspects of life than anything else is. Part of why attachment styles initially caught on so strongly was because it was what people wanted to hear at the time. This post-World War II era was a time when, now that the men were back from the front, there was an expectation that women would give up their jobs and stop working and go back to being homemakers. But when many women decided to continue their jobs and instead send their children to daycare, that was grossly upsetting to a lot of people. So research that blamed a child's issues as an adult on their mothers not being there or not being able to care for them at the time was very, very popular because it made mothers feel guilty for working. Even today's attachment style resources are all about how to be the perfect parent from absolute day one so you don't screw up your child forever, which is just an unfair amount of stress to put onto a parent. It also gave the idea that if you just do a good job in the first year of life, your child would have a good outcome, and that will prevent things like anxiety and depression. This theory started to really fall apart in the 80s when those initial kids grew up to still experience things like anxiety and depression. Other things we now know about attachment styles are that they change based on the relationship. Your attachment style with your dad may be different from with your partner, which will probably be different from your boss, which will be different from your friend. It has been suggested that this concept completely underestimates the flexibility and plasticity of children. A child can have grown up in the perfect, safe, and secure household and then around the age of 4 be forced to live with an abusive relative, and they're still going to be at risk and struggle with things because of that. And the opposite can also happen. Things are never objective and fixed and permanent. Wild how that keeps coming up as a theme on this channel. But let's move on from the logistical debunking of these ideas and move into the practical debunking of these ideas. What are the issues with them in practice? How do they cause harm? And of course, what do we do with this information? Now, with love languages, I sort of touched on this earlier, but these can often be used as a tool to override boundaries, like saying, I know you're not comfortable doing this thing, but it's my love language, so I need you to show me that you love me. Physical touch can be a huge one here, which we talked about earlier. Another one that I've heard a lot of is people saying their love language is gift giving and expecting the partner to constantly buy them things that they cannot afford to be doing. It can also be used as a tool for coercion and forcing an unhappy partner to compromise their own needs rather than work together to find common ground. They can also be used for scorekeeping, like, hey, I did 3 acts of service for you and all you did was give me a hug. Why don't you care about me? When in reality, that person emptied the dishwasher, folded a blanket, and moved over the laundry, while the one who gave them a singular hug has sensory issues and doesn't like to be touched very often and did that in between doing all the rest of taking care of the children, right? That is not an even playing field there. In order to be marketable, Chapman had to sell the love languages as this one-size-fits-all marriage fixer when that is not how they work. It's also not how anything works, but that's beside the point. Toxic behaviors or communication struggles are not going to be magically fixed by this, and to some degree this mindset can actively encourage people to stay in abusive situations because they just feel like if they try harder and they give in to their partner a little bit more, things can get better, when in those situations they don't. Get out of those situations. They're not healthy or safe or good for you. You can find better ones. Also, love does not have to come exclusively from other people. Yes, we all deserve to be loved and adored by our friends and partners. That is point blank very important. But at the same time, we cannot get all of our feelings of love and assurance and confidence from the outside, right? There needs to be space for you to do the work to understand yourself and love yourself and know how you want to take up space in a relationship. And the way that Chapman describes love languages, he makes it almost as if the partner is solely responsible for making you feel loved and appreciated 24/7, but you should also have other people in your life who make you feel that way. You should have ways to love yourself so that you feel that way, and you should feel love from all kinds of directions in all kinds of different ways all the time, because that creates healthy emotional space between people and it sets you up for success. Love languages, much like attachment styles, also change and can change across relationships over time within a relationship. They're not consistent, innate, or the sole thing responsible for every aspect of what could be going wrong in a relationship. Attachment styles in particular also often get used to try to pathologize minority sexualities and kinds of relationships relationships. I've personally seen attachment styles primarily used to slander poly people. Attachment styles were originally created for use in clinical contexts, and much like love languages, if it gives person the language to start to have wider and deeper conversations beyond that language, that's fantastic. I don't entirely agree with something that's functionally debunked that it should be used even in a clinical context. That might just be my opinion. But outside of a therapeutic setting, however, it is absolutely an issue. I ended up on attachment style TikTok by accident once, and it was a very scary place to be because none of those people really have the qualifications to be armchair diagnosing other people they do not really deeply know, beyond the fact that these shouldn't be used in the first place, obviously, because it's hard to tell the difference between somebody's personality versus their attachment style. The internet has also been trying to pretend that they're holding all attachment styles equally, but has actively created this hierarchy of them, which creates inherent stigma and inherent gendering in various attachment styles. Several articles I read talked about how most people online talking about attachment styles are cis women who are calling themselves anxiously attached and diagnosing cis men as being avoidantly attached, treating it as if like anxiously attached people are perpetually victims and avoidantly attached people are perpetually perpetrators. This also very easily slips into labeling people as narcissists, the internet's favorite word that it does not actually seem to understand at all whatsoever and should not be using point blank. This usage of attachment styles deliberately ignores context and intent and instead focuses on trying to name, understand, and have control over things in a relationship rather than just having a conversation with the other person. Like, saying somebody must be avoidant because they didn't respond to your text in 3 hours when actually they're at work. And spending a lot of time trying to put thoughts into other people's heads is always a very dangerous and slippery slope. It can also be used to explain what's wrong with the other person that is making you feel a certain way rather than looking at what responsibility you may also hold in any situation. When we spend so much energy labeling others and pointing out their flaws, we tend to overlook our own behavior and minimize our capacity to grow. When we slap reductive labels on other people without questioning why they are behaving in a certain way or looking at our reaction to how we perceive their behavior, we absolve ourselves of responsibility for our own actions. All of which, again, creates a huge cognitive bias that gets in the way of our ability to grow and learn and change as people. Both love languages and attachment styles try to find an objective shorthand to explain how people behave in relationships, which is just not how that works. Much like the issue with personality tests, which we talked about in another video in this series, I'll link it above, taking something fluid and complicated and contextual and trying to turn it into an objective measure that puts people in subgroups can make people change their behavior to better fit within the specific group. It can make us see others as their specific label, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it can also actively stunt growth, both by putting you in a position of like, I'm this way and that's why this is happening to me, so I just need to find people who perfectly match that and then I won't do any self-growth myself, which can also on the flip side look like, I am this way, which makes me broken, and so I will never achieve X, Y, and Z. And it makes people feel like there's no way out of things or no way to work through things. This cognitive bias also makes us ignore a lot of the wider things at play. If you're so focused on understanding your partner's love language or on fixing your attachment style, you may be missing so many other pieces of the bigger picture as to what is going wrong and where you can learn and grow together. These things can feel deep, but they're actually functionally pretty surface level, and strength in relationship comes from the depth that these things simply cannot offer. They can open a door for deeper conversations to get to that depth, but they're really not going to fix the problem for you outright. These things can also make us more focused on finding partners and friends with matching styles rather than working between supposedly conflicting ones, throwing out potential options before we've had a chance to really give it a try. These tools have a lot of flaws, I think I've made that pretty clear at this point, but they were initially created to try to help intercommunication and understanding of others, not to be like a compatibility checklist that weeds people out. It is this endless stream of highly relatable content that, in promising to make us more self-aware, indirectly ends up encouraging us to optimize our relationships like we might our jobs. Personal boundaries, values, and red flags we may recognize from past experiences are undoubtedly important to pay attention to, but in shutting ourselves off from those who don't tick the right boxes delivered to us as Instagram checklists, we're no longer cultivating accountability. Instead, we may have veered into territory where our unwillingness to interact with others based on labels or micro-behaviors that we interpret as signs of future incompatibility is only eroding human empathy. But then the next question, of course, is the why. Why do we like these things and why do we hold on to them so strongly? And I think I've sort of answered that earlier in this video, but there are some things about being a human person that are really scary and very overwhelming and unknown. Relationships are probably the very top of that list. And so we hold on to anything that might turn that into something less complicated, something more predictable and easy and a rule set to follow rather than something you might just need to feel out and figure out and get hurt along the way. The Input article on love languages talks about how if any metaphor is going to be used, it should be that relationships are like a balanced diet where you have all kinds of variety and may lean heavier on different things depending on what you need at a specific time, and those things will change and fluctuate with time. Love languages and attachment theory seem to make sense because it's an easy to understand language. The idea is simple enough, it solves a lot of problems, and at their core they seem logical, so we want to believe them to be true. And at their core, the message of people like to feel loved and communication is important very much still stands at the end of the day here, right? But the rest of this is more or less just trying to sell you a false sense of comfort in a thing we can't really ever truly know or truly ever plan for. So when it comes to the, what do I do with this newfound information? All I can really say is like, hey, maybe stop looking for band-aid solutions and for quick fixes to big and heavy problems and instead work on engaging thoroughly and intentionally with the things that are big and heavy and scary, which is terrifying. I get that. There's a seductive comfort to having labels and specific formulae to explain the fundamentally hard and unknowable things in life, especially when you've been hurt a lot and especially if you're an autistic person, right? And you know that you miss social cues, so you're trying to overshoot a little bit. But they really just create a string of cognitive biases that are actually making it more difficult to engage thoroughly and thoughtfully. And I get that if feels like this is a way to pre-screen things to like prevent hurt in the long run, but hurt is kind of inevitable to some degree. That's kind of how life works, and learning how to work on handling that and learning from that is going to get you a lot farther than trying to avoid it altogether. Unfortunately, the harder and scarier answer is the right one here. It's also the answer that isn't trying to sell you courses and books and all kinds of things, which is maybe another indicator that maybe it's got a little bit more merit to it. But that is all that I have for you today. This is a pretty short one, but if you want to stick around on this channel, I would love to have you here. You're welcome to hit any of the buttons below, maybe leave a comment for the algorithm. You're also welcome to join my Patreon if you want to make it possible for me to make more of these and get early access to stuff and exclusive content. And as always, thank you for being here. Thanks for being. And remember that critical thinking is really sexy. I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.